Roberto had spent so many years trying to be accepted that, somewhere along the way, he stopped noticing the cost. He became the kind of man who could read a room before he could read himself. Around his parents, he chose the career they praised. Around his friends, he laughed at jokes he didn't find funny. In relationships, he said what sounded safe, what sounded agreeable, what sounded like love. He had learned early that approval felt like peace, and rejection felt like danger. So he adapted. He polished himself. He performed. And because everyone seemed pleased, he convinced himself that he was doing the right thing. But there is a strange price hidden inside that kind of survival. The more Roberto tried to be liked, the less he recognized his own reflection. His opinions grew quieter. His boundaries became blurry. His real desires were delayed, then denied, then forgotten. He could no longer tell whether he wanted something because it was true for him, or because it would earn a nod from someone else. That is how social approval works when it becomes a master instead of a signal. It doesn't just shape behavior. It slowly edits identity. On the evening of his 30th birthday, Roberto stood alone in front of the bathroom mirror while the rest of the world celebrated him in another room. The light above him was harsh and honest. He looked at his face, his tired eyes, the polite smile he wore so often, and something inside him went cold. Not because he looked older, not because time had passed, but because the man staring back at him felt unfamiliar, almost rented. He had spent 3 decades becoming what everyone else needed, and now, in the silence, he couldn't answer the most basic question of all. Who am I when no one is applauding? Have you ever felt that tension, too? That moment when you realize you have been living as a version of yourself designed to be accepted, not as the person you were meant to become. Roberto's story is not rare. It is painfully human. We are all tempted, in one way or another, to trade authenticity for approval, to shrink ourselves to fit in, to mistake being tolerated for being known. But the truth is, a life built for applause will always collapse under silence. And if you've ever felt that pressure to please, to soften your truth, to disappear a little so others can stay comfortable, then stay with me. Because what Roberto discovers next changes everything. At first, Roberto tried to ignore the feeling. He went to work, answered messages, laughed at the right moments, and kept performing the version of himself that people seemed to like. But once you see the crack, you can't unsee it. Every compliment started to sound like a test. Every silence felt like rejection. He would change his tone in meetings, soften his opinions with friends, and rehearse simple conversations in his head before saying a single word. He was not living anymore. He was editing himself in real time. The more he tried to be accepted, the more exhausted he became. It was as if he were carrying an invisible mirror everywhere he went, always checking how he looked in other people's eyes. If someone seemed disappointed, he felt responsible. If someone disagreed, he took it personally. If someone approved, he felt relief for a moment, then panic because now he had to keep earning that approval. That is the trap of social approval bias. It promises safety, but it quietly steals your freedom. One night, after a dinner with friends, Roberto got home and sat alone in the dark. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. He remembered how he had laughed at a joke that hurt his values, how he had agreed with an opinion he didn't even believe, how he had smiled while feeling smaller each minute. He looked at his hands and thought, who am I when nobody is clapping? That question stayed with him longer than the noise of the evening ever did. And that is where change begins. Not in becoming colder, arrogant, or indifferent. Real freedom does not mean rejecting everyone. It means no longer abandoning yourself just to be liked. Roberto started noticing how often he said yes when his body wanted to say no. He began hearing the difference between honest respect and fear of disapproval. Slowly, he understood that people-pleasing is not kindness when it comes at the cost of self-betrayal. If this is hitting close to home, just leave a like so this message reaches more people who need it. Ask yourself honestly, how many of your choices are truly yours, and how many were made to avoid someone else's disappointment? That question can be uncomfortable, but it is also the beginning of strength. Because once a man sees where he has been living for applause, he can begin the deeper work of building a self that does not disappear the moment others stop watching. And that is where Roberto's transformation truly begins. On the night everything cracked open, Roberto sat alone in his apartment while the city hummed outside like it didn't care whether he existed or not. The mirror in front of him reflected a face he recognized only in pieces. The suit chosen to look serious, the haircut approved by others, the careful expression that always seemed to ask permission. He leaned closer, searching for himself the way a man searches for a lost phone in a dark room. But the truth was colder than that. There was no one behind the performance. Just habits, just fear, just a lifetime of editing. He heard his mother's voice in his head first. Be polite. Don't be difficult. Then his father. People respect confidence, so don't embarrass yourself. Then the voices of friends, co-workers, old partners, all layered together like an invisible committee voting on every sentence he ever spoke. Roberto realized, with a shock that tightened his chest, that he had never once asked the most important question of all. What do I think? What do I want? What do I actually believe when nobody is clapping? That was the moment the old life lost its power. Not because the pain vanished, but because he finally saw it for what it was. He had mistaken approval for love, agreement for safety, and silence for maturity. He had been living like a guest in his own life, careful not to touch anything, careful not to offend the hosts who were never really in charge. And in that instant, something inside him refused to keep bowing. The next morning, he did something small that felt enormous. In a meeting, when everyone nodded at an idea he didn't believe in, he looked up and said, calmly, I see the logic, but I disagree. The room went quiet.
No aplausos. No disaster.
Just a pause that felt longer than a year. Roberto's heart pounded, but beneath the fear was something new. Dignity. He had not disappeared. The world had not ended. He was still here. That is how freedom begins, not with a grand speech, but with one honest sentence spoken by a man who is done begging to be accepted. And once you feel that shift, even for a second, you start to wonder how many times you have betrayed yourself just to remain comfortable in other people's eyes. If this resonates with you, leave a like, because this is where the real transformation starts. And tell me honestly, where in your life are you still asking for permission to be yourself? At first, Roberto thought freedom would feel loud. He imagined some grand moment where the fear would vanish, where the opinions of other people would suddenly stop mattering. But what he discovered was quieter than that. Freedom began the moment he stopped asking, what will they think? And started asking, what do I think? It wasn't easy. The first time he said no without explaining himself, his voice trembled. The first time he wore what he liked instead of what made him blend in, he felt exposed, almost guilty. The first time he shared an honest opinion and didn't immediately soften it to make everyone comfortable. His stomach tightened. But something remarkable happened. The world did not collapse. Nobody came to take away his place. Nobody laughed him out of existence. The silence he had feared was smaller than the prison he had built for himself. That's the strange truth about social approval. It feels like safety, but too often it becomes self-erasure. Roberto had spent years performing a version of himself that could be accepted by everyone, and in return he was accepted by no one fully, least of all by himself. Now, slowly, he began to understand that respect is not earned by pleasing everyone. It is earned by standing on something solid inside you. He started making decisions from that place. Not from fear, not from performance, not from the need to be chosen. Some people drifted away. Others looked confused. A few even criticized him. But for the first time, Roberto could breathe in the middle of disagreement. He learned that being disliked is not the same as being wrong. He learned that boundaries are not cruelty. He learned that a man does not become smaller when he stops chasing applause. He becomes real. And maybe that is the lesson for all of us. The moment you stop living as a character, you begin the slow, honest work of becoming a person. Not perfect, not universally approved, just true. If this story spoke to you, give the video a like so more people can find it. And tell me in the comments, what is one thing you've been holding back because you were worried about what others might think? If you want more videos about psychology, identity, and the strength to live with self-respect, subscribe now. The next conversation may be exactly the reminder you need.